I had always trusted her. My wife, my partner, the person I thought knew me best. 12 years of marriage, countless memories, and a life built together that I believed was unshakable. But that illusion shattered the moment I picked up her phone. It wasn't curiosity or suspicion that led me to it. She'd left it on the kitchen counter while grabbing groceries from the car. The screen lit up with a notification, and a single name appeared: "Can't wait to leave him for you." My hand froze mid-reach. For a moment, I thought I'd misread it. Perhaps it was some spam message, a wrong number, or a harmless joke. But the sinking pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I unlocked the phone, my hands trembling slightly, and opened the message thread. What I saw made my blood run cold. Her words weren't just casual flirtations. They were confessions, promises, declarations of a future where I no longer existed. "I hate pretending around him," she wrote in one message. "Soon, it'll just be us. I promise." Another read, "This weekend, I'll finally tell him. Then I'm yours forever." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the sound almost deafening in my ears. It was as if someone had knocked the wind out of me, leaving me gasping for air. My wife, the woman I had loved and sacrificed for, was planning a life without me. Worse, she was conspiring with another man, her lover, to dismantle everything we had built. I wanted to smash the phone right there, confront her the moment she walked back through that door. My mind raced with angry words, accusations, questions. How long had this been going on? Was it my fault? Had I been too distant, too preoccupied, too naive to see the signs? But something deep within me, some primal instinct for self-preservation, told me to stop. Not yet. I couldn't afford to react out of anger. Reacting now would give her control of the situation, a chance to manipulate, to lie, to rewrite the truth. If I was going to confront her, it had to be on my terms, and I needed more than just text messages to back me up. Taking a deep breath, I deleted the thread from her phone. It was a risky move, erasing the evidence, but it bought me time. She would have no idea that I'd found out, and that element of surprise was critical. My next move required careful planning, not impulsive rage. As I placed her phone back on the counter, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The man staring back at me was unrecognizable. Jaw clenched, eyes hollow, face drained of color. I felt like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. A cruel scene from a movie I couldn't escape. The sound of the car door slamming outside jolted me back to reality. She walked in moments later, smiling casually, holding a bag of groceries as if everything was perfectly normal. I forced myself to smile back, masking the storm raging inside me. Every fiber of my being screamed to demand answers, to yell, to make her feel the pain I was enduring. But I didn't. "Hey, everything okay?" she asked, setting the bags on the counter. "Yeah," I replied, my voice steady, betraying nothing of the truth. "Just checking something on your phone. I needed the recipe you bookmarked." "Ah, okay," she said, completely unsuspecting. I watched her move around the kitchen, talking about her day, asking about dinner plans, and discussing mundane details of our life, as if she hadn't been planning to obliterate it hours earlier. It was surreal. I felt like an actor in a tragic play, delivering lines with precision while suppressing the urge to scream. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the messages in my mind. Each word, each promise to her lover felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. But amidst the pain, a new emotion emerged: resolve. She thought she could blindside me, walk away from our life without consequences. But she was wrong. This wasn't over. I would not be the oblivious, pitiful husband she had painted me to be in her messages. If she wanted to destroy our marriage, she would face the fallout. On my terms. In my time. As the hours ticked by, I began to plan. Not just a reaction, but a strategy. A way to turn her betrayal into her downfall. I didn't just want to confront her. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to understand the depths of the pain she had caused. And when the time came, she wouldn't see it coming. By morning, my resolve was ironclad. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. She had written her love notes, plotted her escape, and declared me irrelevant. Now it was my turn to write the next chapter, and she wouldn't like how it ended. The morning after discovering those messages was unlike any other morning in my life. I woke up before the alarm, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word I'd read on her phone. My wife stirred beside me, completely unaware of the storm brewing just inches away. I could hear her soft breathing, a sound that used to bring me peace. Now it felt like a mockery, a reminder of how thoroughly she had fooled me. I knew I couldn't act on impulse. Not yet. If I was going to confront her, it had to be with the precision of a surgeon, not the bluntness of a hammer. She had spent months, possibly years, crafting this betrayal, weaving her lies into the fabric of our life. If I wanted to unravel it, I had to be smarter, more deliberate. The first step was obvious. I needed evidence, not just a few texts or a suspicious phone call, solid, irrefutable proof that would strip away any chance of denial. Her lover wasn't just someone she was sneaking around with. He was someone she was planning a future with. That meant their affair wasn't confined to romantic gestures. It likely left a trail I could follow. I started small. Later that morning, while she showered, I grabbed her phone again. This time, I was systematic, taking screenshots of anything incriminating. Texts, photos, even call logs. I sent everything to a secure email account I created on the spot. It was tedious work. Her phone buzzed constantly, each notification tempting me to read more, but I resisted the urge to spiral. This wasn't about drowning in pain. It was about gathering ammunition. Her emails were next. She had a habit of leaving her laptop on the kitchen counter, open and unlocked. Between preparing breakfast and getting our child ready for school, I managed to skim through her inbox. Most of it was mundane. Work updates, online shopping receipts. But buried beneath the clutter were nuggets of truth. Hotel confirmations, dinner reservations, even a shared calendar invite for weekend plans, with no further details. I forwarded everything to myself and deleted the evidence of my snooping. Over the next few days, I kept my ears open and my eyes sharp. Every time she left the room, I took mental notes. Was she texting? Smiling at her phone? Making excuses to stay out late? I noticed patterns I had overlooked before. The quick glances at her watch when I spoke, the extra care she took with her appearance on certain days, the way she avoided direct eye contact when I asked about her schedule. But this wasn't just about her. I had to secure my own position. If she thought she could blindside me with divorce papers and walk away with half of everything, she was sorely mistaken. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who came highly recommended by a friend. She didn't sugarcoat things. You need to act fast, she told me, sliding a notepad across the desk. Separate accounts, updated beneficiaries, asset protections. Leave nothing to chance. By the time I walked out of her office, I had a checklist longer than my arm and a steely resolve to match. That evening, while my wife was out working late, I sat down with our financial records. I combed through every statement, every transaction, flagging anything suspicious. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Unexplained withdrawals, charges from upscale restaurants I'd never been to, and a few payments to a name I didn't recognize. With each discovery, the betrayal felt heavier, but so did my determination. She thought she had me cornered, but she was wrong. This was a chess game, and I was already thinking 5 moves ahead. The last piece of my plan was perhaps the hardest, maintaining the illusion of ignorance. Every time I looked at her, the urge to confront her nearly consumed me. But I knew better. If I tipped my hand too soon, she'd find a way to spin the narrative, to make herself the victim. So I played my part. I smiled at her jokes, kissed her goodnight, and acted like the trusting husband she thought I still was. It wasn't easy. There were moments when my mask almost slipped, like the night she came home wearing a new perfume I didn't recognize, or when she laughed a little too loudly at a text while cooking dinner. But each time, I reminded myself of the bigger picture. This wasn't just about confronting her. It was about dismantling her lies piece by piece, until there was nowhere left for her to hide. By the end of the week, I had gathered more evidence than I knew what to do with. Texts, emails, financial records, even a few photos from her social media that she had forgotten to make private. I created a secure folder, labeled it simply Plan, and saved everything there. It wasn't much, But it was a start, a foundation on which to build her downfall. As I lay in bed that night, listening to her breathing once again, I felt a strange sense of calm. She thought she was in control, that she could manipulate me like a pawn in her game. But she didn't realize that the board had already shifted. I wasn't her clueless, unsuspecting husband anymore. I was something far more dangerous, prepared. The irony of it all was that she thought she was untouchable. In her mind, she had me fooled, a loving, oblivious husband who couldn't possibly suspect a thing. And I played my role well, probably too well. But as the days stretched on, her arrogance began to grow. She became careless, reckless even, leaving breadcrumbs of her betrayal scattered around for me to collect. It started small, little things that might have gone unnoticed if I hadn't been paying attention. She began taking longer to get ready, spending more time in front of the mirror than she used to. Her perfume changed. Gone was the subtle floral scent I'd bought her for her birthday last year. In its place was something louder, muskier, something I hadn't even realized she owned. The same perfume lingered on her when she came home late, blending with a faint trace of cigarette smoke. A habit she despised, but one I now suspected her lover indulged in. Her phone became a lifeline she clung to constantly. She used to leave it lying around the house, forgotten on counters or tables. Now, it was always within reach, often clutched tightly in her hand or tucked into her pocket. She'd tilt the screen away from me when she thought I wasn't looking, her fingers flying over the keyboard in rapid, secretive bursts. Sometimes, she'd excuse herself mid-conversation, heading to another room to take a call, her voice dropping into a soft, almost conspiratorial tone. And then there were the excuses. Work ran late. Traffic was horrible. I needed to clear my head, so I took a walk. They came in all shapes and sizes, each one flimsier than the last. The kicker came one Friday evening when she announced, almost too casually, that she'd be attending a work retreat for the weekend. A retreat I hadn't heard a word about until that very moment. When I asked where it was being held, she stumbled over her response, fumbling for details. It was sloppy, painfully sloppy. "Don't wait up," she'd said as she left, kissing me on the cheek like it was any other night. I watched her go, her confidence bordering on hubris, and couldn't help but marvel at her audacity. She was so sure of herself, so sure I wouldn't question her. But that night, as she packed a bag and headed out the door, I followed her. Not physically. I wasn't interested in being caught tailing her car down the highway. Instead, I used the tools at my disposal, a phone tracking app I'd quietly installed days earlier. Her so-called work retreat led her to a boutique hotel downtown. A nice one. The kind of place we'd splurge on for anniversaries or birthdays. I didn't need to see her check in with my own eyes to know who was waiting for her inside. It was all there in the texts I'd saved, the love notes she thought she had erased. The knowledge alone was enough to stoke the fire burning inside me. She stayed the night, of course. Returned the next afternoon with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and a story about boring seminars and bad coffee. I nodded along, pretending to listen, all the while cataloging every word, every inconsistency. She didn't even bother to unpack her bag in front of me. Instead, she whisked it away to the bedroom, likely hiding whatever souvenirs she thought I might stumble upon. As the days turned into weeks, her carelessness continued to escalate. Gifts began appearing around the house, things I hadn't bought and couldn't imagine her buying for herself. A bracelet with an unfamiliar engraving. A pair of designer sunglasses that I knew weren't from her usual price range. When I asked about them, she shrugged, waving me off with vague explanations. A work thing, she'd say, or just something I picked up on sale. Even her tone shifted, becoming sharper, more dismissive. She started treating me like an inconvenience, like someone she barely tolerated. The warmth that once existed between us was gone, replaced by a cold indifference that cut deeper than any argument ever could. But still, I kept my cool. I played the role of the oblivious husband, letting her believe she had the upper hand. Her confidence was almost laughable. She had no idea I was watching her every move, collecting every scrap of evidence she so carelessly left behind. She thought her lies were airtight, her secrets well hidden. But in reality, she was walking straight into the trap I was carefully laying for her. I took solace in her arrogance, knowing it would be her downfall. Every furtive glance at her phone, every whispered conversation, every late-night meeting only added to the growing mountain of evidence I was compiling. I let her dig her hole deeper, let her think she was untouchable. After all, the higher she climbed on her pedestal of deceit, the farther she'd fall when the truth finally came crashing down. The best part? She had no idea. No idea that her every move was being documented, that her betrayal was becoming a noose tightening around her neck. No idea that I was patiently, methodically preparing to dismantle the life she thought she had control over. Let her bask in her false sense of security. Let her revel in the belief that she had outsmarted me. The day of reckoning was coming, and when it arrived, it would hit her like a freight train. Her arrogance had given me everything I needed. Every careless slip, every suspicious transaction, and every work trip became a piece of the puzzle I was assembling. And with each new discovery, the picture of her betrayal grew clearer, uglier, and more damning. I wasn't just uncovering her affair. I was unraveling the double life she had built, thread by deceitful thread. It started with the bank statements. Late one night, while she was in the shower, I accessed our joint account online. I'd expected to find a few unexplained purchases, but what I saw was far worse. Withdrawals, expensive dinners, and charges for boutique hotels were scattered across the months. The pattern was obvious. She wasn't just hiding her affair. She was using our money to fund it. That realization hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. She wasn't only cheating on me emotionally or physically. She was stealing from me. From us. Every dollar she spent on him was a dollar taken from the life we had built together, from the future I thought we were working toward. The audacity of it made my blood boil. But the bank statements were just the beginning. Next, I dove into her email. I'd managed to gain access to her account using a password I'd memorized years ago, one she apparently hadn't bothered to change. At first, it was the usual clutter: promotional emails, work-related correspondence, and random receipts. But buried deeper, in a folder labeled Personal, was a goldmine of incriminating evidence. There were messages to her lover, plans for their next getaway, inside jokes that made my stomach churn, and declarations of affection that left no doubt about their relationship. One email stood out above the rest. In it, she wrote, "I can't wait to leave this all behind and start fresh with you. He'll never see it coming." I stared at those words for a long time, letting them sink in. She had already decided to leave. She wasn't just having an affair. She was planning her escape, and I was the last to know. Or so she thought. I saved the emails, archiving them alongside the bank records and text screenshots. It was all adding up. Slowly but surely, I was building an airtight case against her, a dossier of betrayal that she wouldn't be able to deny or dismiss. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Determined to leave no stone unturned, I expanded my search to her social media accounts. Most of it was innocent: photos of us at family gatherings, posts about work, and the occasional picture of a night out with friends. But then there were the private messages. In her direct messages, I found more correspondence with her lover. They were careful not to use names, but the context was obvious. Discussions of secret meetups, coded references to their relationship, and even photos of the two of them together. One picture, in particular, stopped me in my tracks. It was taken at a restaurant, the same restaurant where I had once taken her for our anniversary. She was sitting across from him, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was a smile full of life, of joy, of love, emotions I thought had been reserved for me. Seeing her like that, with him, was like a punch to the gut. And then there was her phone. I'd already combed through her messages once, but I decided to take another look. This time, I found more damning evidence. Saved photos of gifts he had given her, screenshots of hotel reservations, and a string of messages that confirmed their plans to leave together. One message from him stood out. "Do you think he suspects anything?" Her reply was a dagger to my heart. "Not a chance. He's completely clueless." That one stung the most. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the way she underestimated me, dismissed me, painted me as a fool. It was almost laughable. She thought I was oblivious, incapable of seeing the truth that was staring me in the face. But what she didn't realize was that every word, every transaction, and every photo was being carefully cataloged. She wasn't just digging a hole. She was building a case against herself. The final straw came one night when she thought I was asleep. I heard her whispering into her phone, her voice low, but clear enough for me to catch snippets of the conversation. She was talking to him, planning their next trip. "It's just a few more weeks," she said. "Once everything is in place, I'll be out of here." I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I lay there in the dark, seething with anger and resolve. She thought she was in control, that she was pulling the strings. But what she didn't know was that I was already 10 steps ahead. By the time she left for work the next morning, I had a complete picture of her betrayal. The bank records, the emails, the texts, the photos. It was all there, a damning mosaic of lies and infidelity. And as I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: power. She thought she could destroy me, but she had underestimated just how much fight I had left in me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. If she wanted to play games, I was ready to beat her at her own. The unraveling was complete. Now, it was time to turn the pieces of her betrayal into the foundation of her downfall. Now that I had everything, bank records, emails, texts, photos, and even recordings, I knew it was time to move from the discovery phase to execution. She thought she had me fooled, that I was oblivious to her deceit, but in reality, I had become the silent architect of her reckoning. Every step I took from here would be calculated, deliberate, and devastating. The first step was ensuring that when the fallout hit, I would be standing on solid ground. I started by meeting with my lawyer again, a no-nonsense professional who was more than ready to take on a case like mine. Sitting across from her desk, I presented the treasure trove of evidence I had meticulously gathered. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she flipped through the file, but other than that, she remained composed. "This is airtight," she said, leaning back in her chair. "With this evidence, she doesn't stand a chance. What do you want to achieve here?" "Everything," I replied without hesitation. "I want full custody if possible. I want to keep the house. And I want to make sure she walks away with nothing more than the consequences of her choices." She nodded, scribbling notes as I spoke. "We'll start by securing financial protections. I suggest opening a separate account immediately and transferring any funds you want to preserve for yourself and your child. Close joint credit cards and flag anything unusual on your financial statements." That evening, while she was out working late again, I began taking the necessary steps. I opened a new bank account, transferred what I could without drawing suspicion, and flagged questionable transactions that could later bolster my case in court. I also updated the beneficiaries on important documents, insurance policies, wills, and anything else she might have assumed was still under her control. Next came the house. I knew she'd likely try to claim part of it during the divorce proceedings, so I started quietly gathering the paperwork to ensure it would remain mine. Deeds, mortgage records, and anything else I could think of were copied and sent to my lawyer. Every action I took was with surgical precision, leaving no loose ends. With the financial groundwork laid, I turned my attention to the emotional side of the plan. It wasn't enough to simply protect myself. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to experience the same devastation she had so carelessly inflicted on me. But I wasn't going to confront her in a shouting match, or let my emotions get the better of me. No, I was going to make her face the truth in a way she'd never forget. To do that, I needed one final piece of evidence: her lover. I already knew plenty about him from their messages and emails, but I wanted more. Using some of the details I'd uncovered, I dug into his background. It didn't take long to find out where he worked, a mid-level manager at a tech company, and where he lived, a modest apartment on the other side of town. It was almost laughable how easy it was to connect the dots. He wasn't just her lover. He was a man as arrogant and careless as she was. He left trails everywhere: social media posts, public records, even reviews of restaurants they'd visited together. I documented it all, adding it to the ever-growing file of evidence. If she thought she could run off with him and start fresh, she was sorely mistaken. The next step was setting the trap. I knew I needed a way to catch them together, something undeniable that would force her to confront the reality of her actions. Using the calendar app she shared with him, I discovered they had a weekend getaway planned. Another boutique hotel, this time in the mountains. Perfect. I booked a room at the same hotel, careful to use an alias and pay in cash to avoid leaving a trail. My plan wasn't to confront them in public, too messy, too unpredictable. Instead, I intended to document their time together discreetly, creating a timeline so damning that no argument or excuse could hold water. In the meantime, I made sure my own home was secure. I installed cameras in the common areas of the house, not for spying, but to ensure I could later prove her neglect and absence if custody became a contested issue. I also began subtly shifting our routine, spending more time with our child and creating moments of normalcy to insulate them from the storm that was coming. As the weekend approached, I felt an odd sense of calm. The anger that had once burned white-hot inside me had settled into a cold, focused determination. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was acting, controlling the narrative in a way she never could have anticipated. The final piece of the puzzle was timing. Everything had to align perfectly: the financial protections, the legal preparations, and the evidence of her betrayal. I wanted the moment of reckoning to be so comprehensive, so absolute, that there would be no room for denial, manipulation, or recovery. She wouldn't just lose me. She'd lose the life she had taken for granted. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was ready. My plan was set, my evidence was solid, and my resolve was unshakable. She had no idea what was coming. No clue that the man she thought she was leaving behind had already ensured her future was one of regret and consequence. She thought she could betray me and get away with it. Now, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Once the confrontation was over and I had set the wheels of divorce in motion, my focus shifted to the other party in this betrayal, her lover. He wasn't just a bystander in this mess. He was an active participant, a smug opportunist who thought he could play a part in destroying my family without consequence. If my wife had underestimated me, he had outright dismissed me, mocking me in their messages and playing the role of the conqueror. It was time for him to feel the weight of his own actions. I had learned quite a bit about him through the evidence I'd collected: his name, his job, and his habits. It wasn't hard to dig deeper. A quick search revealed that he worked at a tech company in a mid-level management position, one that came with a certain level of respectability. He had coworkers who trusted him, a boss who likely saw him as an asset, and a reputation he probably cared deeply about. Perfect. The first step was making sure his employer knew exactly the kind of man they had in their ranks. Using the evidence I had collected, I compiled an anonymous report detailing his inappropriate behavior, specifically his relationship with my wife, a married woman. I included screenshots of their messages and photos of their time together, being careful to remove any identifying information about myself. This wasn't about dragging myself into the mud. It was about pulling him down into it. I sent the report to the company's HR department using a burner email account for added anonymity. Within days, I began to see the ripple effects of my actions. My wife's lover went silent on social media. No more smug posts, no more pictures of himself at fancy restaurants. A quick check on his company's website revealed that his name had been quietly removed from the employee directory. The fallout had begun, but I wasn't done. I wanted him to feel the same sense of exposure and humiliation that I had felt when I first discovered their affair. I reached out to a private investigator to dig deeper into his background. I didn't need much, just a few details to give his world another shove. The investigator didn't disappoint. Within a week, I had a file containing information about his past relationships, his financial troubles, and even a few minor legal infractions that would make anyone look twice. Armed with this new information, I decided to turn up the heat. Using yet another anonymous account, I shared the details with his social circle, friends, family, and even a few professional contacts. I didn't embellish or exaggerate. I simply presented the facts. Let them draw their own conclusions. And draw conclusions they did. The whispers started, the gossip spread, and his carefully curated image began to crumble. The best part? He had no idea where it was coming from. He couldn't accuse me without implicating himself, and he certainly couldn't go to my wife for help. She was too busy dealing with her own fallout to save him. He was alone, floundering in a storm of his own making, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. One evening, as I was scrolling through social media, I stumbled upon a post from one of his former colleagues. It was a vague, passive-aggressive message about integrity and how some people don't practice what they preach. I couldn't help but smile. The dominoes were falling, and he was powerless to stop them. But the final blow came a few weeks later. A friend of a friend, someone who happened to know my wife's lover, mentioned in passing that he had been let go from his job. Apparently, the company didn't want to deal with the scandal or the potential liability of having someone with his reputation on the payroll. He was out, and the doors to his industry were quickly closing behind him. I felt no guilt about what I had done. He had inserted himself into my life, my marriage, and my family, with no regard for the damage he was causing. He thought he could steal what wasn't his, disrespect me, and walk away unscathed. But he was wrong. Actions have consequences, and I made sure he felt every single one of them. As his life unraveled, I couldn't help but reflect on how different things could have been. If he had shown even a shred of decency, if he had respected the sanctity of my marriage, maybe he wouldn't have found himself in this position. But he hadn't, and now he was paying the price. By the end of it all, he had lost his job, his reputation, and whatever future he thought he had with my wife. Their so-called love story had turned into a nightmare, and I had front-row seats to watch it all fall apart. It was poetic, really. The man who thought he could destroy me was now destroyed himself, left to pick up the pieces of a life he had so recklessly gambled away. As for me, I felt lighter. I hadn't just survived their betrayal. I had turned it into a reckoning they would never forget. And I wasn't finished yet. There was still more to do, more to reclaim, and more to build. But for now, I allowed myself a moment to savor the victory. He thought he could take everything from me, but in the end, he was the one left with nothing. When the dust of my confrontation with her settled, the real work began. She had underestimated me at every turn, and now she was beginning to feel the full weight of the consequences. If the confrontation had been the bombshell, the legal proceedings were the aftershocks, rippling through every corner of her carefully constructed life. The divorce papers I had handed her were not a mere formality. Every detail had been meticulously planned with my lawyer, leaving no room for loopholes or manipulation. The terms were clear. I was seeking full custody of our child, complete control of the marital home, and the division of assets that reflected her role in our downfall. Every financial misstep, every dollar she had spent on her affair, was documented and included in the case. It wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about making sure she didn't walk away with more than she deserved. At first, she fought back. She tried to play the victim, claiming she'd made mistakes, but didn't deserve to be vilified. She begged for a chance to make things right, pleading for mediation instead of the brutal legal process I had initiated. But I was unmoved. Her tears and apologies came too late, and I had no intention of letting her manipulate me into giving her a softer landing. The legal process was grueling, but I approached it with the same focus and determination I'd shown throughout this ordeal. Every hearing, every document, and every negotiation was another step toward reclaiming my life and ensuring justice was served. She tried to paint me as cold and unyielding in court, but the evidence spoke for itself. Text messages, financial records, and testimony from my lawyer painted a picture so damning that her attempts at defense crumbled under scrutiny. Then came the custody battle. This was the part that hurt the most, not because I doubted my ability to win, but because it forced me to drag our child into the mess she had created. I'd done everything in my power to shield them from the fallout, to ensure their life remained as normal as possible despite the turmoil under our roof. But now, the courts would have to decide who was better suited to provide stability and care. My lawyer didn't mince words. With the evidence we had, the odds were heavily in my favor. She tried to fight me on this too, claiming she had always been a good mother and deserved equal custody. But the facts were clear. Her actions, sneaking around, spending nights away, and prioritizing her affair over her family, showed a pattern of neglect that couldn't be ignored. The judge saw through her arguments, and in the end, I was awarded full custody. She would still have visitation rights, but the primary responsibility for our child now rested with me. As the legal battles raged on, the emotional fallout was equally intense. She had spent so long living in her delusion, believing she could balance her affair and her marriage without consequences, that the reality of her situation hit her like a freight train. Her lover was gone, his life in shambles after the fallout of his exposure. Her social circle, once filled with mutual friends, began to shrink as people distanced themselves from the scandal. Even her family, who had initially tried to defend her, began to waver as the truth became undeniable. I, on the other hand, was experiencing a strange kind of clarity. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly in control of my life. I wasn't just reacting to her actions anymore. I was shaping my own path forward. The house, once filled with tension and deceit, became a sanctuary for me and my child. I made small changes, repainting walls, rearranging furniture. Symbolic gestures that helped me reclaim the space as my own. Emotionally, it wasn't easy. There were moments when the anger and betrayal threatened to overwhelm me, when I questioned whether all of this was worth the toll it had taken. But every time I looked at my child, I found the strength to keep going. They were my anchor, the reason I had fought so hard to protect what mattered most. As the divorce neared its final stages, I started to see the cracks in her once confident exterior. The woman who had smirked at her phone, confident in her ability to deceive me, was now a shadow of herself. She avoided eye contact in court, her once defiant tone replaced with one of resignation. She knew she had lost, and in some small, vindictive way, that brought me a sense of closure. The day the divorce was finalized, I walked out of the courthouse with a weight lifted off my shoulders. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of a chapter filled with lies, betrayal, and heartbreak. I had survived the worst of it, and now it was time to rebuild. She, on the other hand, was left to face the ruins of her decisions. Her lover was gone, her reputation tarnished, and her role in our family reduced to occasional visits. It was a far cry from the life she had imagined for herself when she started her affair. As I drove home that day, I realized something important. This wasn't just a victory, it was a new beginning. The legal and emotional fallout had been brutal, but it had also cleared the way for something better. And I wasn't about to waste the opportunity. When the divorce was finalized, I thought I'd feel empty, hollowed out by everything I had endured. Instead, I felt a surge of something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. The weight of betrayal, of walking on eggshells and questioning every interaction, was gone. For the first time, I wasn't living in the shadow of her lies. The road ahead was mine to shape, and I was determined to make the most of it. The house, once a battleground of suppressed emotions and silent arguments, now felt like a blank canvas. I started small, making changes that reflected the new life I wanted to build. The bedroom, which had felt tainted by her deceit, was the first to go. I replaced the furniture, painted the walls a calming blue, and removed every trace of her presence. It was no longer our room. It was my sanctuary. The living room came next. I rearranged the furniture, threw out the knickknacks that reminded me of her, and filled the space with things that brought me and my child joy. Plants, artwork, and even a new bookshelf to house the novels I'd neglected while my life was unraveling. Slowly but surely, the house transformed into a place of peace and comfort, a true home. Rebuilding my life wasn't just about physical changes. I had to rediscover who I was outside of being her husband. For so long, my identity had been wrapped up in our marriage, in the roles of partner and provider. Now, I had the chance to focus on me. I started picking up hobbies I'd abandoned over the years: woodworking, running, and even photography. Each new project felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming the person I used to be. My child became my greatest source of motivation. They had endured the turbulence of the past few months with a resilience that amazed me, but I knew they needed stability and love more than ever. I made a promise to myself to be present for them in ways I hadn't always been. We started new traditions: Saturday morning pancakes, evening bike rides, and movie nights on the couch. These moments, simple as they were, became the foundation of our new life together. Financially, things began to stabilize as well. The meticulous groundwork I'd laid during the divorce paid off, ensuring that I had full control over my assets and a clear path forward. With the legal battle behind me, I turned my attention to a new challenge, starting my own business. For years, I'd worked in a corporate job that paid the bills but left me unfulfilled. Now, I saw an opportunity to pursue something I was passionate about. I launched a small graphic design business, working from home so I could spend more time with my child. It wasn't easy, late nights, tight budgets, and the constant pressure of being a single parent, but it was rewarding. The business grew steadily, and with each new client, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Friends and family played a crucial role in my rebuilding process. Ella, who had stood by me through the darkest moments, remained a constant source of support. She encouraged me to step out of my comfort zone, to embrace the possibilities of a life free from her shadow. Together, we celebrated the small victories, landing a big client, redecorating the house, and even taking my first solo vacation in years. One of the most unexpected parts of rebuilding was the community I found along the way. Through Ella's encouragement, I joined a support group for people who had gone through similar betrayals. Sharing my story and hearing theirs reminded me that I wasn't alone, that the pain I had felt was something others had survived and overcome. The group became a lifeline, offering advice, empathy, and a space to heal. Of course, there were moments of doubt, moments when the scars of her betrayal felt too raw to ignore. Memories would resurface at the most unexpected times. A song on the radio, a familiar scent, a place we used to visit together. But instead of letting those moments pull me back into the past, I used them as fuel. Each painful reminder was a testament to how far I'd come, a motivation to keep moving forward. As the months turned into a year, I began to notice the changes not just in my life but in myself. I was stronger, more self-assured, and more resilient than I had ever been. The anger and bitterness that had once consumed me began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence that I could handle whatever came next. And my child? They were thriving too. Without the tension and toxicity that had plagued our home, they blossomed into a happier, more carefree version of themselves. Watching them laugh and play, knowing they felt safe and loved, was the greatest reward of all. In the end, rebuilding wasn't just about recovering from what I'd lost. It was about rediscovering what I was capable of, building a life that was richer, fuller, and more authentic than the one I'd left behind. Her betrayal had been a storm, but I had weathered it. Now, with clear skies ahead, I was ready to embrace the future.